excursions into the mystery of human behaviour, disciplined by the practical application of his own deductions. Sometime in the 20s, when Smiley had emerged from his unimpressive school and lumbered blinking into the murky cloisters of his unimpressive Oxford College, he had dreamt of fellowships and a life devoted to the literary obscurities of 17th-century Germany. But his own tutor, who knew Smiley better, guided him wisely away from the honours that would undoubtedly have been his. On a sweet July morning in 1928, a puzzled and rather pink Smiley had sat before an interviewing board of the Overseas Committee for Academic Research, an organisation of which he had unaccountably never heard. Jebediah, his tutor, had been oddly vague about the introduction. "Give these people a try, Smiley. They might have you, and they pay badly enough to guarantee you decent company." But Smiley was annoyed and said so. It worried him that Jebediah, usually so precise, was so evasive. In a slight huff, he agreed to postpone his reply to All Souls until he had seen Jebediah's mysterious people. He wasn't introduced to the board, but he knew half of its members by sight. There was Fielding, the French medievalist from Cambridge, Spark, from the School of Oriental Languages, and Steed Asprey, who had been dining at high table the night Smiley had been Jebediah's guest. He had to admit he was impressed. For Fielding to leave his rooms, let alone Cambridge, was in itself a miracle. Afterwards, Smiley always thought of that interview as a fan dance, a calculated progression of disclosures, each revealing different parts of a mysterious entity. Finally, Steed Asprey, who seemed to be chairman, removed the last veil, and the truth stood before him in all its dazzling nakedness. He was being offered a post in what, for want of a better name, Steed Asprey blushingly described as the Secret Service. Smiley had asked for time to think. They gave him a week. No one mentioned pay. That night he stayed in London at somewhere rather good and took himself to the theatre. He felt strangely light-headed, and this worried him. He knew very well that he would accept, that he could have done so at the interview. It was only an instinctive caution, and perhaps a pardonable desire to play the coquette with Fielding, which prevented him from doing so. Following his affirmation came training, anonymous country houses, anonymous instructors, a good deal of travel, and, looming ever larger, the fantastic prospect of working completely alone. His first operational posting was relatively pleasant, a 2-year appointment as Englischer Docent at a provincial German university. Lectures on Keats and vacations in Bavarian hunting lodges with groups of earnest and solemnly promiscuous German students. Towards the end of each long vacation he brought some of them back to England, having already earmarked the likely ones and conveyed his recommendations by clandestine means to an address in Bonn. During the entire 2 years he had no idea of whether his recommendations had been accepted or ignored. He had no means of knowing even whether his candidates were approached. Indeed, he had no means of knowing whether his messages ever reached their destination, and he had no contact with the department while in England. His emotions in performing this work were mixed and irreconcilable. It intrigued him to evaluate from a detached position what he had learnt to describe as the agent potential of a human being, to devise minuscule tests of character and behaviour which could inform him of the qualities of a candidate. This part of him was bloodless and inhuman. Smiley in this role was the international mercenary of his trade, amoral and without motive beyond that of personal gratification. Conversely, it saddened him to witness in himself the gradual death of natural pleasure. Always withdrawn, he now found himself shrinking from the temptations of friendship and human loyalty. He guarded himself warily from spontaneous reaction. By the strength of his intellect, he forced himself to observe humanity with clinical objectivity, and because he was neither immortal nor infallible, he hated and feared the falseness of his life. But Smiley was a sentimental man, and the long exile strengthened his deep love of England. He fed hungrily on memories of Oxford, its beauty, its rational ease, and the mature slowness of its judgments. He dreamt of wind-swept autumn holidays at Hartland Quay, of long trudges over the Cornish cliffs, his face smooth and hot against the sea wind.